Cabo Delgado Province in northern Mozambique has seen escalating extremist violence, and the Southern African Development Community has recently authorized its troops to help fight the ongoing terrorist attacks there. Now, there are also calls for humanitarian support in the area where thousands have been misplaced by the attacks or displaced. Experts are holding discussions to try to find some lasting solutions to the dire situation there. The Center for Democracy and Development in Mozambique has held talks on how to curb extremism and terrorism. So what realistic solutions exist, and how can displaced citizens return safely to their homes? Let's talk about this now with Director of the Mozambique Center of Democracy and Development, Professor Adriano Nuvunga. Prof, a very good afternoon to you, and thanks so much for your time. Now, we know that representatives of various bodies actually met on Wednesday to discuss just how to move forward with this, and especially with those who need to go back home, those who were displaced and need to safely return home. What were the decisions or resolutions taken around that in particular?
Indeed, representatives from central, local government, and national and international think tanks have recognized the importance of dialogue to solve the conflict in Cabo Delgado. It was a key and important message. But also, the participants to this important event have acknowledged the importance of military and the security sector governance needed to set things right with the support of international participation, preferably from SADC, in order to not only to give the military support in a form of intelligence and also denying real support to violent extremists in the capitals within SADC, but also the cross-border governance issue. But important here is the issue of dialogue. Yeah. And some people were asking, how is it possible to have dialogue in a faceless violent extremism? The conclusion of this meeting said yes, that it is possible, also taking into account the root causes of this conflict. Yeah. And in that, the participants said the root causes, although this conflict, it has international intersections, the root causes speak to local grievances, including greed in relation to the mineral and oil and gas wealth in the region. Yeah. So the dialogue here.
And Prof, speaking of that, when you talk about oil companies, I mean, let's just rope in their humanitarian agencies as well. What should they be doing? How are they playing their part? And how much more of a bigger part can they play in quelling the violence? And some of it is just horrific, what we're hearing, and also getting people safely back home, especially at a time like this where we're battling a pandemic.
Indeed. The message that we got from the Ministry of Defense is that they agree, they advocate for a dialogue. It has to be an inclusive dialogue, taking into account the losers and the winners, but also taking into account the interests of local communities, including religious leaders, women's movements, and also organizations protecting the children. And at the same time, create conditions for stabilization of security so that IDPs can return home in safety, while there is a broader humanitarian assistance, which will enable the minimum conditions for the IDPs to return home in safety. But at the very same time, there is a need for amnesty for those young people who were attracted to join the violent extremists' ranks, create corridors for them to return home in safety, and also using governance mechanisms for the host communities of these returnees to be accepted in a relatively good conditions.
And Prof, you speak of SADC and the role that it should be playing, and I say should because many people feel that SADC has not stepped up to the plate, especially with the situation as well. We understand and we know that back in May there was that extraordinary double Troika summit of SADC that happened in Maputo, and we know that South Africa has sent some troops to Cabo Delgado to rescue and repatriate citizens and in the middle of those militant attacks. And also we know now that budget cuts might even threaten their involvement there. In terms of SADC, are you disappointed in what you've seen so far, or how have they actually been asked to actually do something about this and do something tangible, make a real difference?
Yes. We would have wanted a clear message from the government of Mozambique asking for SADC to intervene. But at the summit, the recommendations to deploy the standby force, it was endorsed. This is an important, and SADC has recently made available a $12 million budget. This is an important step in the right direction of creating the conditions for SADC to participate in helping Mozambique solve the conflict. But this, again, is dependent on Mozambique making the request from SADC, given the nature and mandate that was given by the summit.
And it also seems that there are some cautions around sort of military intervention in terms of quelling the violence, finding those responsible for these atrocities. I mean, our very own Institute for Security Studies saying that you have to be quite cautious because you actually don't want to bring about, more negative effects or consequences from this. And what are your thoughts on that, or the panel that actually spoke about this on Wednesday? What are your thoughts on military intervention and whether it could actually cause more damage?
The webinar on Wednesday was clear in saying that the solution for Mozambique's violent extremism in northern Cabo Delgado is governance, is dialogue. But there is a need for security stabilization to allow humanitarian assistance for IDPs, to assist them, but to allow them also to return home. So that is important. But it has to be done in a way that it does not further militarize northern Cabo Delgado, which is already suffering from problematic governance of the different forces that are acting in the area.
So what's the plan, very quickly, for us? What happens now? When does it actually, when does it come into or kick into gear then to help those who are caught in all of this?
The way forward now, it's a three-dimensional dialogue in Maputo, in Cabo Delgado. And in Cabo Delgado is where the bulk and critical work is, including local communities, the religious leaders, women's movements and organizations, and including IDPs as an important way of accessing those who have directly suffered, and to understand some of the manifestations of the actions of violent extremism, but also in the Tanzanian side, where there are issues at the border and in terms of accepting or not refugees, etc. So this is where the governance and dialogue as approach for the Cabo Delgado is going to take place, with a clear participation of the Defense Ministry and key actors. But also at the very same time, we are engaging SADC on how SADC can be most relevant in the Mozambique case, which include, as I've indicated, participation in stabilizing militarily northern Cabo Delgado, but more importantly, it's governance that is needed from SADC.